I thank you all for joining here. As I said, my name is Kyle Johnson. I'm the Vice President of Strategic Growth here at Atomic Data. It is Atomic Data and AgileBlue here to present the IT infrastructure dilemma, which is a combination of balancing security, agility, and cost. See a lot of familiar names. Just little housekeeping. If anyone has any questions through here, please use the Q&A function and not the chat function, and we'll come back around to that here in a little bit. So for today, we have 45 minutes of content planned here. We're really talking about what the infrastructure trade-off is here, and the trade-off's different for every single person. It could be cloud, it could be hybrid, it could be tech debt, it could be aging hardware, it could be advances in IT and where we need to go. We'll talk through some of those scenarios. We have one of our clients joining the call. We'll get into a little detail specific to what their dilemma was and what trade-offs they chose to make and how they advanced their IT. And then we'll focus a little bit more around security. How does security operations factor into IT infrastructure and the decisions that we have to make? And as I mentioned, we'll move on to a question and answer portion with whatever time we have remaining at that point in time. Today, we're joined with a handful of panelists here. We've got Tim Grosich, the Director of Service Offering at Atomic Data, Jonathan Delbert, the Director of Business Development here at Atomic Data, Tony Pietrocola, sorry if I got that wrong, the President of AgileBlue, and Don Bacchetti, the VP of IT from Lifeworks. I just want to call it combined with the panelists and myself. We have 85 years of IT experience and cybersecurity experience here on the panel, and we're trying to tap into a little of that experience to kind of show our direction and our thought process moving forward here today. So I kind of want to set the table by talking about IT of the past. And everyone knows IT is evolving constantly. But if I look at IT in my career, and I've been here going on 14 years at Atomic, about 17 doing consulting in an IT sense. I always kind of viewed IT as a bell curve. You know, whether it was an SMB and it was I don't have the capital outlay, or whether it was no one wanted to invest into IT. I know we've all heard that here. There was a world where we focused on capital infrastructure. Let's put everything on premise, buy licensing, and run this thing into the ground, get 5 to 7 years of it. At some point in there, some advancements in technology, some new toolings that came out, people moved more into a hybrid model. And that hybrid model started pulling them more and more towards virtual servers. And it eventually evolved to the point where we started running into a lot of mid-sized companies that had maybe a server on site, maybe not. It depends on the business, and everyone's got their unique nuances that go to it. Well, what we've started kind of experiencing here in the last couple of years is, as more organizations keep maturing, we keep finding that all of this money went to the cloud, and some of the spend in the cloud. We have one client in particular that has a $200,000 per month Azure bill. All of a sudden, with all the bells and whistles that come with Azure, which is a great platform, I'm not denying it, there's a question of what's the ROI and what's the run rate that makes sense to keep moving more and more to the cloud. And you'll start seeing articles, they've been coming out here for 6 months to a year, where there are large organizations that have pulled things back inside because it works and it's cost effective, even if they're giving up a little flexibility or a little elasticity with it. As we move forward a little bit, we kind of started coming into the modern version of IT. And there are companies today that have never had a server and may never have a server. It's an interesting model when you're leveraging SaaS everywhere under the sun. You end up where you start having disparate sets of data, and centralizing that data for analytical purposes becomes challenging, more and more so by the day as the sprawl of data happens. And so what we started to see with this is the IT role has changed. The same individuals that were working on-premise Exchange or on-premise SharePoint or basic file services are not doing the same roles they're doing today. That same role exists, but it is less of customizing and building out large SAN platforms with a ton of hosts, and it's more about configuration and centralization of data. So some of the roles that we've seen from a staffing standpoint, like even here at Atomic, we just don't need the same role we have had historically in some ways, and we're moving more and more towards software-defined everything. And it's down to the point where we have a team today that I couldn't have described what they do 5 years ago, and it's an entire team of people sitting here today that is solely based around a data practice. So the evolution's created a little bit of a virtuous cycle in IT. Technologies like data lakes were designed, they solved fragmented data, and they have done that. But they've also introduced new challenges around complexity, governance, visibility, and the growing demand for smarter infrastructure to support real-time decision making. Excuse me. So it's a gradual evolution. Majority of you on this call just can't start greenfield like a startup. We've been doing IT too long. We've got tech debt. We've got contracts. There's legacy data that's been retained, maybe on tape. Who knows? And these elements heavily influence what we can and can't do with infrastructure. And so, as much as it might sound simple just to move everything to a cloud, that isn't realistic for a lot of our clients and a lot of the people that we talk to out there. And so, what is the plan to gradually bring us into the modern IT workforce, and how do we want to tackle some of the challenges that the modern IT presents? Um, like everything in IT, it's a journey. So, with that said, we've made this a little bit of a choose your own adventure campaign here. So we have a poll that will pop up here momentarily, and we've broken this down really to three aspects. There is agility, security, and cost. There are more than that, but those are three of the most kind of critical topics that we want to touch on today, and we will touch on all of them. But we want to tailor this a little bit to the audience we have today. And we've got some results coming in, and looks like cost is leading the race so far. No surprise. Obviously, it's business. Business is a little bit messy, and that is a driver in it. So we can focus a little bit more that direction. It looks like we got about 45, 50 responses in here. Give that one more second, and I'll move on here. So what really are the headwinds that businesses are facing today? I have met a lot of people on this call. I think most people have heard me say it, but I view IT as a facet of business, but I look at it from a business lens, then a fiscal lens, and then an IT lens. There's a lot of different ways we can cut this, but we've started seeing some of these disruptive forces coming through. I don't know who hasn't asked about AI, some people not knowing even what they're asking for, but it's definitely pushing our business and what we're doing a little bit. We're seeing security threats that are bubbling up everywhere. You know, email compromises are probably taking 9 out of 10 of what we see, maybe 8 out of 10, but ransomware still exists. DDoS ransom still exists. Just basic brute force compromises still happen today. Multi-cloud complexity, I mentioned a little bit earlier, but as we keep sprawling out, like, what are we doing to have consistency and global management across numerous different cloud and SaaS-based platforms from a security standpoint, from a workflow standpoint, from a cost standpoint? I've talked a little bit about the labor force and the talent and skill. The direction it's moving is very different than it has been. And most people don't have a data analyst or a business analyst on staff, but that is going to be the reality in short term. Trade policies, just candidly, I have no idea what tariffs look like. It is changing by the day. It feels like we've had a calm for a couple of weeks, so we're probably due for a little bit more of a shakeup coming soon. And then when we look at future risks moving forward, whether it's operational, whether it has to do with our fiscal spend, or just simply reputational damage. And then what's the team up against? I think we've all been in the trenches at one aspect or another, and there's great pressures that are being pushed against us to grow businesses and scale. A lot of you have probably heard me talk about modular growth. What existed in 2020 in the dependency on an office slowly became a luxury of an office. And the luxury of having an office shouldn't mean my business should depend on that office. So how do I build a resilient infrastructure that can support end users around the nation, around the globe? And one of the stats we found kind of keen here was 39% of IT leaders, only 39% of IT leaders think their infrastructure is ready to manage future risks and disruptive forces. So to our polls point here, you know, I think we've all seen this diagram in a Venn diagram version of it. And it is hard to master the three of these together. And so whether we're talking about speed to market, whether it's DevOps, whether it's um, just basic workflows for end users, being able to use native applications and push through it. Security, we put it right in the middle of the balancing board here. It's impossible to have one of these conversations where we don't talk about security. It is table stakes. It is just what you have to do to move forward at this point in time. And we're seeing it from regulatory demands. We're seeing it from internal governance. We're seeing it from external auditors. We're seeing it from cyber liability insurance. And all these pressures are pushing the envelope for people to mature IT as quickly as possible. But with that comes a hit to either cost and agility. And both of those things are something we need to discuss today. And then lastly, with the direction we're seeing quite a few things move, it is all operational expenditure. And so we're talking monthly per user, per device fees moving forward, which is a great model for some people, but it doesn't necessarily have everything that everyone needs, or you're buying more than you're using in them. And so as we look at SaaS or IaaS or managed services, and they're all aiming, myself included, for a predictable, scalable upfront cost or lower monthly cost moving forward to align with what we're seeing in procurement across the board. But all of those things come at a cost of either speed or security, unless you can find that perfect Venn diagram middle ground for it. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Tim Grosich, and hopefully he can tell me a little bit more about how these trade-offs manifest and some ways that we've been able to overcome them.
Thank you, Kyle. And thank you all for joining us today. Costs, security, agility. These are all pieces that come into being for what we need to make decisions around. And we're all placed with a whole lot of decision fatigue. There's so many things, there's so many variables out there that need to be discussed, identified, and all of us are making decisions, both explicit decisions as well as implicit decisions. Now, the polls show that most of the people on this webinar are interested in costs. And cost is a very interesting topic. How does your organization view cost? Does your finance team, do they want you to have capital expenditures? Do they want the variability that you get with operating expenditures? I met with a law firm in the last month that is a traditional capital expense focused organization. And they have a full stack of equipment, full VMware stack, SAN, Cisco UCS blades, full Cisco fabric. And they have an on-prem data center in their space. They recently were burned by a power event in their building. Originally, they were running VDI for all their staff, and they had probably 50 to 60 servers. VDI is gone. They're under 20 servers. They're right now looking at, do we build? Are we going to build a much smaller footprint? Are we going to lean into private cloud or public cloud? Are we going to try to make the push for serverless and try to move as much as they can into the SaaS piece? On the security side, there's a number of pieces that come into place depending on your industry. For customers that we work with in highly compliant regulatory industries such as finance, security. I hope I said it enough. There are continual investments year over year, improving process. They're reducing tax services, training their staff, everything, just to ensure that they have those pieces in play. And then agility, sometimes people want to try something, they want to fail fast. And leaning on SaaS and cloud is a great way to do that. You can try something, you can see if it's going to stick without, sinking yourself into a multi-year investment. The biggest thing we need to go through as we look at these decisions is what is going to deliver the most return on investment to our organization. And we think about this a lot when we meet with customers, because we're all on this same journey. Every single one of us, we have his own journey within Atomic. You have the journey within your organization. Everyone is working on trying to deliver the best ROI in their business. So market value is really focused on what can we do to reduce client churn? What can we do to reduce client costs? And there's lots of things that each of us can do to show value to help our customers. Like, why does Apple why do they have a Genius Bar? It isn't just about fixing hardware that people bring in, but showing how someone can extract more value out of the product they purchased from Apple. A law firm in real estate is provides a lot of valuable services. There's a lot of changes that happen at city level, state level, federal level, and they can do a lot to show the value and increase engagement with their customers just through things like webinars such as this one, LinkedIn, reaching out to existing customers. Risk reduction, we often quantify risk in terms of ROI. People often think of like this tool that we're going to purchase, this security tool, for example, is going to have this very expensive cost. The part that often isn't asked is, what is the cost of a ransomware event to our organization? What is the cost of fraud, of somebody sending funds to a bad actor, right? We need to identify those risks and really go through what the operational risks are. We worked with a client a number of years back that would say wholesaler. They have warehouse, they ship goods. They had a ransomware event. They were unable to ship goods for 2 days. There's a monetary risk. They ended up having to hire a bunch of forensic work. They worked with Atomic. We helped them get back to an operational state. So there was monetary costs that they hadn't planned for. And then there was lastly some reputational risks. We all can think back to when Target had their big event about 10 years ago now. They saw reduced sales. People shifted sales to Walmart and other retailers. And the last thing that we think about when we talk about ROI is, how do we build capacity? How do we make less mistakes? How do we improve our quality assurance in our product? How do we focus on continuous improvement? Can we make things flow faster through our system? Where is our bottleneck? One of my coworkers, Dustin Saunders, recently worked with a client to put in some automation around an invoicing process that was 100% manual, error prone. And by doing this, it's looking like they're going to save a quarter to half a full-time employee in this process, which frees up their resources to focus on far more challenging and far more valuable work to the business. And so if we bring it back into focus, there's all these pieces on the pendulum as we talked about. Where do we prioritize? These are questions that every single person in the roles that we sit in today need to ask themselves. Do I care about how fast I can move? Do I care about how secure my platform is? Because we always have to weigh in, how convenient is something versus how secure something is. And where's costs? And as indicated, there's a lot of interest around costs. Right now, there's so much uncertainty, as Kyle alluded to, with tariffs, but there's a lot of other costs. It's not just the asset or the software you're purchasing. You have resources that have to be trained on it. You need to make sure the tooling aligns with your security practices, your governance practices. How is the data protected? Where is the data located? Are you, weakening your security posture just because you're chasing costs at all pieces, no matter what? As well as, what is the user impact? At this point, I'd like to introduce Jonathan, who's like to share a story with one of our clients.
Good morning. Thanks, Tim. I'd like to introduce Don Bacchetti, Vice President of Information Technology at Lifeworks. Don, thanks for joining us today. I'd like to say it's been an amazing partnership with Lifeworks and Atomic over the last 19 years. It's hard to believe that this started back in 2006. During that time, Atomic has had the opportunity to partner with Lifeworks on so many different solutions in their business, critical business practice areas, including connectivity, that we started with a very traditional hub and spoke MPLS solution, eventually graduating to something a little bit more modern, SD-WAN technology, co-location solutions in multiple regions to support the geographic separation pertinent to their compliance requirements for the organization, security services, disaster recovery solutions, and ultimately some dedicated private cloud hosting for business critical services like corporate websites. Don, could you share a little bit with us about who Lifeworks serves?
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here, and it's been an amazing journey. And I've been part of that for 16 years, and I've been working with Jonathan that entire time. And it's been a wonderful partnership that has benefited us in so many ways. Lifeworks Services is a nonprofit organization partnering with people with disabilities. We're focused in the state of Minnesota, throughout the state of Minnesota. Lifeworks is celebrating our 60th year. We were founded in 1965. Lifeworks is focused on advancing disability inclusion. And to that end, Lifeworks collaborates with individuals, employers, communities, and governments to create opportunities and build an accessible, equitable, and diverse community. And we are focused on disability inclusion being the standard, not the exception.
Could you share with us a little bit about the compliance requirements that you're up against in your industry? You're faced with some really stringent requirements.
That's right. And we've worked and partnered with you and your team throughout these years, and with those very strict regulations in mind. Primarily, we are governed under HIPAA, as many healthcare organizations are, due to funding and contracts and other requirements. We're also governed through those contracts under the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, MGDPA. And then there are also very strict regulations for us in many other areas, including in our finance teams, due to the Medicaid funding we receive and Medicare streams that are a big part of our funding. So with those, I would mention that we also have increasing requirements for cybersecurity insurance, and we're seeing each year as we are doing our renewals and doing our assessments, we're seeing more and more stringent and tighter requirements around what is expected of an organization for privacy and security.
Definitely a growing concern. With that being said, Don, what's Lifeworks' current infrastructure dilemma?
Yeah, our dilemma is so many of the things that you have been bringing up in this webinar. We are right in the thick of looking at our costs, looking at our security posture, looking at our current infrastructure, and as you mentioned, looking at how to have predictable pricing and predictable costs moving forward. That has been, I would say, the thing that really started our conversation going back about a year, maybe a little longer, that I've been having with you and Tim, because we're seeing increasing prices in our infrastructure services software, particularly in our virtualization stack and in our storage network stack. So we're seeing prices that are increasing at rates that we have not seen before. And so as we expect those types of price increases to continue and to make predictability very almost impossible, we are looking at models with you where we can stabilize. We're also moving to, as has been mentioned, we've been moving to SaaS solutions and reducing our reliance on on-premises and legacy applications. And that has been led us to be able to decommission many of our infrastructure resources and shrink the size of that. And that also then is part of our dilemma. So we're right now evaluating with you, are we at the point where that ROI is there? And can we conceivably move away from our on-premises legacy infrastructure and move to the cloud, whether it's private or public hosting or something in a service with a provider such as Atomic, where we can have controlled pricing, but also have greatly improved support and availability and security. So we're weighing all of those things. That dilemma, though, is there because we're also then looking at if the timeline wouldn't work out, what will we need to do in this sort of midterm in terms of replacing hardware? And what does that impact us from a capital standpoint versus an OpEx standpoint? So all of those things we're going through right now, and we are We are so lucky or so glad to have a partner such as Atomic as a trusted advisor to work through this dilemma with us and look at these challenges and look at our options and especially help us model the pricing and model the ROI.
I appreciate you sharing that with us. It's definitely a tall order. Did you experience any trade-offs in your journey to date of decision making and where you're putting your focus in order to achieve this end goal? It must be really hard with a very small, tight-knit IT group.
Absolutely. And as we've had, the trade-offs have been around how we do scalability and how we can be agile. And so we have a small team and we have kept, like you say, a tight-knit group and a tight implementation of our infrastructure. We try to keep the costs as manageable as possible. That's always at the forefront. And we have had a lot of trade-offs in terms of finding skill sets to support our infrastructure and finding the people we need for security and keeping them on staff. Now, with the partnership we've had, we have great resources from Atomic, such as you and Tim. We've been working with Tim as long as I've been with Lifeworks to design a very scalable and available and highly supportable infrastructure. But those trade-offs, I think, are becoming more apparent as we look at the cloud services and as we look at our ability to potentially turn our resources to be more focused on data and look at things such as security in much greater depth with our same team and look at reskilling by having a partner such as yourself able to do many of the things that we're currently doing by managing our own infrastructure. So we're very excited about where we're going and the future, especially as we've been able to shrink down our infrastructure needs, knowing that we have legacy systems that will continue on in the midterm. That said, we'll be able to take advantage of all of those things that you and Tim have discussed leading up to this in terms of availability and supportability of cloud offerings.
Sure. Don, thank you very much for taking the time today to share with us kind of your experiences, your journey, and kind of the dilemmas that you guys are facing and how you've overcome some of those while you're still in flight, right? This is a constant evolution, a constant flow. With that being said, I'd like to hand the presentation back to Tim.
Thanks, Jonathan and Don. So one of the core pieces is planning for balance. And we've worked with Lifeworks following this plan where we assess the problem, we strategize what does done look like, what do we need, we figure that out, we've migrate, optimize, and then after we've done that, we're allowed to innovate. And one of the things that I have seen is that there's some people that like to jump straight to migrate and then not have a plan. And this is probably the most important thing is have a plan, have other people look at it. I've seen customers that have underbought and then they don't have all the resources they need to fully bring something to market and get the ROI that they're planning on. I've also seen customers overbuy because they jump straight in and suddenly they've got capital or operating expenses that they've committed that could have been used elsewhere in their organization. And so this time, Jonathan and we're going to talk through some of the scenarios we've seen with our customers of some of the infrastructure pieces. So Jonathan, I know you recently had some experience with a customer on office real estate.
Yeah, actually quite a few, Tim. It's been very interesting as the real estate market continues to be volatile. I think businesses have learned, on the heels of 2020 that a remote workforce is indeed something that the business can support. And that kind of that transition into hybrid workforce, we're seeing then organizations coming up on the terms of their leases. They're reducing their footprint. They're looking for a smaller operational expense in turn looking for solutions to migrate away from those on-premises infrastructures, whether that's a solution with co-location. We had a client recently who had made that business decision, looked to reduce their real estate, elimination of their data room. They were faced with a very interesting conundrum because the timing of when the new real estate was going to be ready was a significant gap. Resource availability, construction timelines really threw them off kilter. So we quickly pivoted, moved their infrastructure into our data center. And now they're, standing true, being able to operate the entire time, co-located infrastructure, remote access into the systems. Everyone needed to be remote for a matter of about 2 months before they could move into their new real estate. It's very interesting right now.
Yeah, on that, we also have seen customers with application sprawl and shadow IT. And in the world of SaaS, often all you need is a credit card. And one of the challenges that we've seen customers find out is that somebody's put a very critical business practice in place using a tool that IT has no visibility of. There, we don't have ideas of what users have access to it. We don't know offboarding, onboarding needs. We don't know how is that data managed, protected. How does it for compliance? And as Tony will allude to later, we don't know what is going on. We don't know logging and other pieces in that. And then another scenario we have is M&A. And Jonathan and I both work with a number of customers that are growing through acquisitions.
Yeah, it's a very, very hot trend right now. I guess the piece that I would say from a business challenge standpoint, migration and key outcomes standpoint is discovery. Do the homework ahead. We've had a number of different situations in which, clients are continuing to grow by acquisition, but the due diligence maybe isn't, IT is not offered the opportunity to do the due diligence on the organization being acquired. And we've run into some pretty interesting business challenges helping clients then absorb and get them into the rest of the organization's business tools because that homework wasn't done up front and some very big surprises. Separate operating systems, the G Suite and other tools being leveraged, while valuable, just didn't fit the core business application stack for the acquiring organization. So they've been met with some unpredictable costs and spend to assimilate them into their business units.
Some of the other scenarios we have seen is, as I mentioned, aging on-prem infrastructure. This legal form that I mentioned earlier, they know what repeatable does, but the numbers might not make sense anymore, that it may be better for them to leverage infrastructure, someone else's infrastructure, right? The cloud is just someone else's computer. And then we also see some customers along with the M&A that grow rapid, have rapid geographic expansion. I know, Jonathan, you've seen lots of that with some of your clientele.
Indeed, there's it's been really prevalent this year alone, just in the manufacturing space. And it is really based on growth, right? It isn't necessarily based on acquisition, and standing up geographically separate warehouses, locations, manufacturing facilities. We have a manufacturing company who's been with us for several years, has got 4 locations here just in Minnesota, but up and decided it was time to, put a foot in, the southeast portion of the United States. And so we're helping them build a new network for a brand new facility. So it is very, very prevalent right now.
And the last bit is for business challenges, security, right? And Tony's going to lead us through a lot of the things he sees at AgileBlue, but we've seen walk customers through this journey of what does good security look like, that whole balance trade-off, right? And
right.
There's often the conversation around how to show the value, how to understand, this tool costs X, but not having this tool, and if we have an event, is going to cost, 10 times X.
At least 10 times that. I mean, just walking through some scenarios in my head of past experiences in the last 16 months of seeing customers go through the peril of this and the tools that could have been implemented earlier as a preventative solution rather than a reactive betterment implementation, which, of course, is a direct result of their cyber insurance and insurance requirements to ensure that the protective covering is put in place to prohibit, the next event, if you will.
At this point, I'd like to hear what Tony has to say about security first mindset.
Absolutely, Tim and Kyle. First of all, thanks for having me. You guys are talking about these security overhauls, which is great. And you hear these terms security first. And what's fantastic is we've been talking about costs, right? Because costs all have to be balanced. So how do you take that into consideration when you're taking that security first measure? And when you think about security first, it's how do you weave security first into everything you think about? So for IT folks, traditionally it's been network and endpoints and then obviously it grew to the cloud. And a lot of folks think, hey, I'm in Amazon, or you mentioned earlier, I'm in Azure. Those guys got billions and billions of dollars. They're doing my security. They're not. That security shared responsibility. That's you. And now, obviously, after COVID and we had more remote work and people using their phones for everything these days, not just personal stuff, but obviously business stuff, our attack surface has just grown tremendously. So where we used to think security first for network and endpoints has now grown to pretty much our whole business. And a lot of folks don't even think about this. Your critical business applications, from Salesforce to Jira to Slack, whatever you might be using, there's been a number of case studies showing where Slack has let bad actors into an organization. You're thinking, boy, we're just chatting, right? It's even down to the application level. And sometimes it's the application level that's that blind spot that an organization doesn't see, right? So it's really interesting to see what that supply chain also brings into the organization. Something gets compromised that maybe is out of your control, but then all of a sudden it puts your organization in peril. Also, application development. We're all, my company's a software development company. We got tremendous software engineers, but just about every company now has software engineers in developing some type of tech, whether you have people doing it or maybe you're using one of these AI tools, which are, pretty darn good, right? The problem is we're releasing code or we're releasing applications. Is it secure? Are we taking a security first mindset to make sure the code we're implementing doesn't have those gaps and vulnerabilities inherently built in? And that's something all of us have to do, and we need tools to help us do that. And then, of course, what would a webinar be without AI, right? I mean, come on. I mean, we'd be ostracized from the webinar community. AI is so prevalent in everything we talk about these days, because the bad guys are using AI and they're tremendously crafty at what they're doing. And it's not just deep fakes, video and audio that they're using. It's now text messages that are so compelling. It is increasing the engagement with these things. So at the same time, we need to use AI, right? Which is going to help us with visibility and identifying vulnerabilities and gaps in our systems early before there's a breach. And that is a different mindset. We've been so used to reactive cybersecurity. Proactive cybersecurity sometimes takes on a completely different connotation that maybe we're just not ready for yet. So let's dive a little bit into security operations, or SecOps. And obviously, my banner right here shows that. So let's talk about it, right? We used to, again, put security in this little box. Well, that little box expanded to 3 little boxes right now, and those 3 boxes are pretty important, right? You got security, you got IT operations, and then of course now we got DevOps. And DevOps has really caught on pretty largely over the last 7-8 years, and really becoming a very important part of our production environments, right? All of us. But it's interesting to see that these things are still very siloed. I don't care if you're a small business, a mid business, or an enterprise business, whether you're state government or federal government, a lot of these processes still reside siloed. So you got individual data, individual security, not correlating, not working together. And again, when that stuff is siloed, we have gaps. And it's generally when you do the postmortems on a ransomware attack or some type of breach, it's that gap, or maybe a supply chain gap, but nonetheless a gap, that was how that breach happened. So when you think about SecOps today, it brings together these 3 elements, really reducing or hopefully eliminating those silos. And that bridging that gap is job number one. Job number two, the bad guys don't work 9 to 5, right? In fact, I don't know if they're up between the hours of 9 to 5, whatever your 9 to 5 might be. They seem to do really well at night with a whole bunch of Red Bulls or whatever the Monster energy drink is du jour. And they tend to work overnight, right? So that 24/7 visibility of everything. And I don't just mean the endpoints or network. I mean that entire digital infrastructure is monitored 24/7 and the ability to respond immediately. It can't be a response that's like, hey, we found something. Now let's investigate this for the next 5 days and figure out what we do. By then we're done, right? We're done. In that response needs to be fast and hopefully with a high degree of confidence to, if not stop, at least mitigate that cyber attack. And that allows our business to proceed, not be shut down, not to have all of our data ransomware, or not to have our business disrupted, right? And then how does AI, of course, power security operations these days? And over the course of the last 18 months or so, and definitely now, present and into the future, AI is synonymous with SecOps. And here's why. It brings three things that are so critical. Number one, increasing detection. Autonomous, not just detection, but investigations and decisioning is key to getting out ahead of these cyber attacks. And then, of course, that autonomous response, or at least a system that's smart enough to understand we got something here. I'm going to grab one of my 24/7 guys, give it one last look over, and then we're going to do something. We're going to respond. I will tell you this. You can't stop every cyber attack, but what you can do is you can mitigate it. And the more you mitigate, the bigger you get a chance to make your business succeed. And, a lot of people talk about, hey, we want to make sure we keep you out of the headlines. And, we saw recently that Cub in the Twin Cities has, the pharmacies was facing a disruption. As you notice the word disruption, right? Sometimes it's not about the ransomware aspect of it. Of course, no one wants to pay a whole bunch of money for something. None of us do. But it's a disruption to the business. If Cup Pharmacy can't get somebody life-saving medication or medication that's going to help someone obviously be able to live the life they need to live, that has a real life and death effect on what's happening. What about supply chains these days? Since unfortunately we're living through a couple of wars right now globally, we've actually seen disruptions in critical infrastructure, not just airlines, right, and airports, but also things like energy systems. And sometimes those things are kept out of the news. Sometimes they're pushed forward with the news. We don't know. But there's a lot of disruption going on. And I will argue that, hey, no one wants to cut a check with ransomware. But disruption to your business, bringing a business down, could be life or death for that business. Sometimes on the ransomware part, at least insurance might be able to jump in, might be able to help keep things afloat. Disruption's a different story. If you can't operate, how does the business continue, right? And as we continue to talk about security operations, we also have to look inward at ourselves, right? Like, again, when you're in the cloud, I think each cloud has 4,438,000,000 controls to it, right? And who knows what each of those controls and configurations and settings do? I don't think anybody, right? A lot of it is a lot of work. It's a lot of trial. It's a lot of, hey, well, here's what we've seen here, right? Misconfigurations around infrastructure, applications. There's so many layers to security and to applications, your infrastructure environment. This is where we need, that assurance plan to make sure the cloud, your infrastructure, applications, everything is working cohesively. All that data is pushed to a SIM. We're able to correlate that data, understand where we have potential gaps in our configurations and different things like that. I love that stat to the left. Security breaches due to misconfigurations of infrastructure, 80%. In fact, IBM will push out a even a little bit higher number at closer to 90. I don't know which one's right, doesn't matter. It's a high number. And it's not like we're being malicious. Maybe we're just a little bit negligent in what we're doing. And we're not all masters at Azure, AWS, and Google. So we really have to put technology to use here to reduce the burdens on our configurations. And then finally, because I'm sure everyone on this call is tired of hearing me yap about SecOps and security and why it's so important, we talked earlier about costs, right? I mean, we heard Don talk about how his organization is balancing costs. Every organization, from the Department of Defense all the way down to some mom and pop, is balancing costs. It's not easy, in security, not cheap. It's just not cheap. But when you think about building your infrastructure, which for just about everybody, it's probably digital at this point, right? Your business is a digital business. How could you not protect it? It's the equivalent of opening up a brand new office somewhere and not putting an alarm system or a lock on. Like you just can't do it. So when you think about what you're going to spend and you think about that advancement of your digital infrastructure, security needs to be part of it. It's not like we build it, then we think about if we have a security expense. While we're building it, we're building security first. Those budgets are going into it. Because without it, do we really have a secure, stable business, right? And again, the last thing I'll say is, it's not just about the ransomware. It's not just about how expensive a breach might be in terms of tangible dollars. It's that disruption to business, disruption to your customers, and probably your reputation that goes along with it. So I will now kick this back. Hopefully that was a good introduction into how we look at security first. Kyle, I'll let you take back the reins.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tony. And, just sitting here reflecting on the last, what did we do there? There we go, Scott. Just reflecting here on the past hour, thinking of Don talking about his rising costs and how that was the key indicator in our poll. The interesting aspect of that is, Don is a nonprofit, and being a nonprofit, there historically has been discounts that have come from numerous manufacturers or distributors. And we're starting to see a few things where A, Broadcom came in and shook the entire world up. B, nonprofit discounts are kind of going by the wayward in a handful of areas here. And, it isn't just nonprofits that are dealing with this. This is rising costs across the board, and it just catches my attention when I think a little bit about it. So we talked a lot about security, and I said it earlier, but security really is table stakes, and it probably will be part of some aspect of every webinar we ever do. The other components being agility and cost. It's very hard to speak broadly on those to a wide audience when everyone has their own nuanced setups, environments, servers, not servers, SaaS, not 200 people, 2,000 people. And so I would love to get into the details on how we work through agility when it comes to security and how we can implement good security measures and keep the workforce working the way it should. I'd love to talk about cost, but I think each one of those needs to be tailored to every individual on this call for a conversation. And so if there are any questions or any thoughts on one, how we scale, or what do I mean by modular growth, or what Don has had to deal with, without getting into too many details in his business, I'm happy to share at a high level some of the pain points and structures that we've walked through with numerous of our clients, and not just Don. And so whether it's building a plan for ROI by figuring out what trade-offs make sense for business objectives, or whether it's reducing long-term costs and consolidating, happy to hop on a call, have a conversation, walk anyone through the details to their own business, and really right size it to the business, because that's the key important that comes with us. So I'm going to throw it to the last slide here. And, we have a infrastructure refresh checklist, which really isn't a lifecycle management document. It's a how do we plan for the future document. So if you have questions for us and want us to look into it, absolutely, we would happily review that, sit down with you, and walk through what that means for your business. I see a couple of the attendees here, and we're walking through the same thing with a nonprofit that has, I believe, 14 servers on premise, and we're doing a complete transformation into M365 and SaaS-based platforms and reducing their costs overall. Another individual on this call sits with a handful of servers in co-location, and they have got some dependencies due to some compliance. Same conversation. How do we reduce that server footprint? How do we tune the SaaS-based applications and review it all from a security standpoint? So just like those two that are just off the cuff, happy to kind of curate this to your business a little bit there. I did get a couple questions directly here. And so we've got 8 minutes left here. If anyone has any other questions, please use the Q&A. It's hard to keep track of all the chatter through here. I'll throw this to Tony and Tim both here. You know, how do you ensure security doesn't slow down transformation?
Tim, you want me to hop on first?
Yeah, why don't you go first, since
Okay.
we've got some security expertise here.
Yeah, well, I'll be brief. Look, at the end of the day, I think everybody has to understand that when you do bring in security into your growing business, your digital infrastructure, application development, your software coding, there could be a little bit delay, right? We could see some expansion of implementation times. We can see some expansion of Q&A, right? Now, the way to look at that is obviously it's important to plan and understand what that might add. I don't think it adds more than, say, 10%, just being very upfront about what we've seen internally with ourselves and across some of our customer base. But the question is, regardless of what it adds, maybe it's 20% at first and you get better at it, how could you do it without it? And if you are releasing something without that, are you really putting your business, your customers, your data at risk, right? So look at 10% and think about how you might implement that 10% as part of your timeline when you start synthesizing the plan to how you're going to get it to production.
Yeah, the thing I always like to think about is how there's a maturity cycle, right? As new methods, new tools, new processes are introduced, things just get faster. There's things we do at a security point that's just matter of course today that took a lot of time 10 years ago. Like you'd be hard pressed to find anyone who brings in a tool that IT knows about that isn't going to make sure it can talk to their IDP and has role-based access controls. Like that's just that's table stakes, right? That's not oh, we just brought this thing in. And we see this as more and more tools gain maturity in the market, whatever those tools are.
Just to dovetail on that, Tim, something you said there kicked it off in my head, but I see a lot of our clients that are implementing new tools or implementing new software packages, new advancements in technology. But what I see our clients miss the most, and we're subject to it as well, is then deprecating old tools. We can't just keep adding on without removing. Now, there's rhyme and reason why we may keep something for a legacy or amount of time in there, but it is a key component that we need to look at, because you'll hear me all day long till I am blue preach simplicity and security. And that is the magic equation to make IT cost effective, agile, secure, and keep moving forward from there. Got a couple other questions that popped through here. What are some signs that an organization's infrastructure is no longer fit for future growth? It really varies to business. So where I initially go is scale. As we're growing, as we're evolving, as we're expanding, is this by headcount? Is this by revenue? Is this by client count? Every one of those things can implement or can impact what we do here. And so when I think of the infrastructure that's no longer suited to do it, and I think of some things that Tim mentioned with a law firm, and we're talking about a VDI environment. VDI has been historically great for scale. There's another client on this call here that had the opposite problem with it. They're in construction architectural shop that had absurd costs due to VDI, and they couldn't scale at a cost reasonable extent or have the staffing in IT that was capable of keeping up with demand from it. I also would push it a little bit more into the security side world as well. As you keep getting more and more exposure as a brand out in the market, that impact becomes greater. And so if I have one client and I'm down for a couple hours, I probably miss a few emails. If I've got 1,000 clients nationally and we're down for a brief moment of time, people run to target. So how do we keep building a security structure in place and have some of the kind of best hygiene practices there to help mitigate the event that there is an incident? Because the reality is, like, no one's ironclad. Incidences will happen with that. And then there's simply just, how do you advance with the times? In AI, it looks like the next question is going to dovetail into a little as well. I see countless clients that it gets time to do a lifecycle refresh, and they refresh what they had because that's what they know and that's what's worked. But being able to take that step back and really spend time looking at this with the direction the business is going, again, business, fiscal, IT, business should drive these decisions. And so IT should have to curate and fit to the decision that business is making within reason. Obviously, there's ground to stand on. There's rhyme and reason why IT should be a voice in the room. but at the same time, to keep growing from that point moving forward is just crucial to it. I'm going to jump to the last question from Aaron here. 100-person architecture and design firm. How should we be thinking strategically about leveraging AI, especially generative tools and automation in both our design workflows and business operations over the next 3 to 5 years? What infrastructure or capabilities should we be investing in now to prepare for the future? I'll start it and I'll throw it, whether Tim or whomever wants to jump on it. But right off the cuff, it's going to come down to your data and data integrity, data centralization. And so whether you're investing now in a data lake or whether now you're investing in tools that have API calls that are pulling that data and integrating that data into single visualization tools, really what it turns into is putting that LLM or more of an agentic model onto a database, and that data needs to be clean. Atomic, we went through a CRM implementation 4 years ago, and we backed out of it, 25th hour, because our data wasn't good enough to do it. And so we needed to spend a couple of years cleaning our data before we could go move forward with that CRM implementation at a future date. And now we can layer AI onto it because we trust our data. Tim, you got any other comments as a passing note here?
No, I think you've covered most things I would focus on. I mean, a lot of the pieces for AI and agentic AI, there's all these buzzwords right now. For like this architectural design firm, there are things today that happen that are very manual that you'll be able to leverage some of these tools. The big piece is going to be making sure you have control of your data, you have your governance pieces in place, you're protecting the data, and you're not letting any of these things. These are your clientele. Just the way how you operate your business. It's very important that you use these tools as everyone is embracing them, but that you have control of the data and you make sure that it's secured, because you certainly don't want to have any of that data leaked out or find its way into somebody else's AI model.
Yeah, last comment on that. Turning AI on is easy. It's literally an easy button. Turning it on with good governance behind it is the hard button, and that takes 100% of the work in order to making AI work. So on that note, I appreciate the time. It's 11 o'clock on the nose. Thank you all for the time. If there are any questions or anything, feel free to reach back out our way and we'll follow up with y'all independently. Thank you all.
Thank you.